Camp Pendleton, California, felt less like a training base and more like a small, self-contained city on the edge of the Pacific. But in the stark, concrete structure of Barracks 31, in the administrative wing, the atmosphere was thick with bureaucracy and boredom. Staff Sergeant Mia Chen, call sign Whisper, had been assigned to the logistics desk 3 weeks ago. It was a mandatory administrative rotation after a grueling, classified tour in the Middle East. Mia was 30 years old, compact, strong, and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that silence was often the most useful tool in combat. Her official records showed commendations for technical ingenuity and maintaining supply lines under fire. But they omitted the missions where she had personally disarmed volatile enemy ordnance that others feared to touch. She was Whisper because she rarely spoke, preferring action to noise, and she carried the weight of her classified service like a mantle of solitude. To the men in the bustling main section of the barracks, she was just another body filling a desk, a female soldier with a specialized, often dismissed, technical skill set. Gunnery Sergeant Kyle Tank Rourke was the antithesis of Mia. He was large, loud, and obsessed with the old-school image of the combat Marine. Tank was assigned as the barracks operations manager, a job that should have been purely logistical but which he treated like an absolute kingdom. He measured a Marine's worth by how much noise they made, how big they were, and how much dust they tracked in. Tank hated the administrative wing. He saw it as soft, and he saw Mia as the softest thing in it. The daily ritual was always the same. Tank would swagger past Mia's desk, usually making a loud, dismissive comment. Today, Mia was meticulously cleaning a small, heavy wooden box. It wasn't standard military issue. It was simple, carved from dark, hard wood, and felt impossibly heavy for its size. Inside, it held the few personal relics she kept, a broken compass that had saved her life during a sandstorm, and a faded map section showing the coordinates of the supply point she had established deep behind enemy lines. It was her private symbol of sacrifice and survival. Tank saw the box as Mia walked from her desk toward the filing cabinet, holding the box gently in both hands. "Well, look at the paper pusher admiring her little trinkets," Tank boomed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He stopped directly in front of her, blocking the narrow walkway. Mia stopped, her face impassive. "Good morning, Gunny," she said, her voice low. "I need to access the Class C files." Tank stood there, arms crossed, his large frame radiating hostility. "You know, Whisper, I always wondered what you people do over here. Filing papers? Polishing your trophies? Real Marines are out on the range, not playing with dolls and boxes." Mia felt the familiar spike of insult. She was physically tired from long hours of organizing the disastrous filing system Tank had neglected, and emotionally drained from being judged by a man whose arrogance far exceeded his deployment experience. "My assignment is logistics management, Gunny," Mia replied, maintaining control. "It's critical to supply chain integrity." Tank scoffed, throwing his head back in a show of contemptuous laughter. "Integrity? You think your little box of ribbons matters when the supply truck breaks down? No one here respects you, Private. Your decoration, you're filling a quota." Then, with sudden, cruel intent, Tank reached out and shoved her, not violently, but hard enough to be utterly disrespectful, knocking her shoulder with his elbow. "Out of my way, desk jockey," Tank sneered, laughing as he watched her stumble. The small, heavy wooden box flew from Mia's hands. It hit the concrete floor with a startling, loud crack. The lid flew open, and the contents, the broken compass, the faded map section, scattered across the dirty floor, mixing with dust and bits of office debris. Tank stopped laughing. He looked down at the scattered items and then back at Mia, who was breathing hard, her eyes wide with shock and pure, cold fury. "Oh, did I break your little toy, Private?" Tank mocked, the contempt hardening his voice. "Get down on your hands and knees and pick up your garbage." Tank stood over her, his hands on his hips, enjoying her humiliation. He was making a show of it, a loud, clear display of dominance for every other Marine within earshot. In that same instant, the filing cabinet doors near Mia slammed shut with a sharp clang. A low, collective sound, a sharp intake of breath, a scrape of chairs, rippled through the entire barracks. Tank laughed one last time, a loud, booming sound of victory. "What are you waiting for, Private? Go on, pick it up." But Mia wasn't moving. She was staring at the floor, specifically at the contents of the box. And then slowly, deliberately, the noise of the entire administrative barracks stopped. The sounds of typing, shuffling, and talking ceased. Tank, still laughing, finally realized something was wrong. He glanced around the large, open-plan office space. Every Marine in the barracks, every staff sergeant, corporal, and lieutenant, was no longer looking at their desks. They were no longer working. They had all stopped, and in perfect, unsettling unison, every single Marine in the barracks' 31 administrative wing had turned their head toward Tank and Mia. Their expressions were not curious or amused. They were utterly, chillingly silent, watching Tank with a singular, focused intensity that felt heavier than the concrete walls. Tank's laughter died instantly. He didn't understand the sudden shift. He didn't know who these Marines were or why they had all turned. He only knew that the silence was no longer passive, it was predatory. The atmosphere had changed from a simple office dispute to a clear, organized front of opposition. He looked back at Mia, who was finally rising slowly from her half-crouch, her eyes fixed on his, and he realized he was no longer talking to a desk jockey. He was facing an organized, silent enemy, and he had no idea what her secret weapon was. Part 2. The line drawn. Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, Tank, felt a sudden, cold sweat break out beneath his uniform. The silence in Barracks 31 was absolute, weighted by the focused gaze of dozens of Marines. He had expected indifference, maybe a few snickers. He had expected the paper pushers to look away. He had not expected this organized, hostile stillness. Tank straightened, trying to reclaim his dominance. "What's the matter, people? Back to work. You haven't seen a woman drop her knitting before." No one moved. The Marines, men and women who ran the entire logistics and administrative heart of the base, held their position, their faces impassive. Mia, whisper, finally stood fully upright, her gaze locked onto Tank. She ignored the scattered remnants of her box, knowing that picking them up now would be a sign of defeat. "I need to report an incident, Gunny," Mia said, her voice now dangerously calm. "Physical intimidation and destruction of personal property." Tank roared with artificial laughter. "Intimidation? I barely touched you, Private. This is the Marine Corps, not a kindergarten. Get a backbone, and those trinkets, garbage. Get them out of my sight before I charge you with cluttering a military workspace." But before Mia could respond, a staff sergeant named Ramos, a large, respected Marine who oversaw supply transport, spoke up from the back, his voice low and firm. "I witnessed the incident, Gunny. SSGT Chen was shoved without provocation. Her property was destroyed." Another voice, a corporal who managed sensitive personnel files, added, "I corroborate SSGT Ramos' statement. Unwarranted physical contact and mockery." Tank was taken aback. This was unheard of. These were administrative drones, usually too scared of him to meet his eye. "You'll shut your mouths," Tank barked, his face reddening. "Or you'll all be running suicide drills until midnight. I don't take lip from desk jockeys." The confrontation escalated quickly. Mia knew reporting this incident to the barracks commander, Major Pierce, would be futile. Major Pierce was an old friend of Tank's father, a powerful general who ensured Tank's promotion path was frictionless. But Mia had to try. She collected her composure, walked past Tank, who bristled but didn't dare touch her again under the dozens of watchful eyes, and headed straight for Major Pierce's office. As expected, Major Pierce was dismissive. He listened to her account while meticulously polishing a piece of chrome on his desk. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Major Pierce sighed, tapping his pen. "I've reviewed your complaint. Rourke is a bit overzealous, but physical contact in a stressful environment, especially among combat veterans, is common. He didn't hit you, did he?" "He shoved me, Major, and he destroyed property of significant sentimental value. He mocked my service." "Sentiment is not a regulation, Chen," Pierce said coldly. "And frankly, Rourke is high value. His father ensures a lot of funding flows through this base. Your rotation here is almost up. I suggest you drop this, avoid making waves, and accept an administrative reprimand for exacerbating a minor disagreement. You need to learn when to pick your battles, Staff Sergeant." The injustice burned hotter than any desert sun. Her complaint was not only dismissed, she was being punished for making it. She realized the system was entirely rigged in Tank's favor. Her bravery in the field was worthless here in the administrative purgatory. Mia left Pierce's office, defeated but determined. She walked back toward her desk, passing the watchful Marines. They didn't speak, but their eyes followed her with silent empathy. They knew the truth, even if the command structure ignored it. As she reached her desk, she paused. The scattered contents of her small wooden box were still on the floor. She knelt slowly and carefully, picking up the dusty, broken pieces. First, the small, leather-bound map section. The coordinates of the supply point she ran for 6 months, a point that kept 3 forward operating bases alive. Second, the broken compass. The needle forever stuck pointing north, a casualty of the massive enemy IED blast that had ended her last mission and given her the TBI. Finally, she picked up the box itself. The heavy wooden material was intact, but on the corner where the box had struck the concrete, the impact had revealed something she had forgotten was there, a secret hidden compartment. Mia's fingers went to the compartment. It was designed to look like a seam in the wood. She pressed a certain point, a reflex action she hadn't used in years, and the section of wood slid open, revealing a hidden space. Inside, resting on a bed of old felt, was not a medal or a ribbon, but a small, heavy piece of polished, black carbon composite. It was shaped like a stylized feather, the only physical evidence of her most classified, unofficial service. It was the badge of the Ghost Platoon, a high-risk, black operations unit dedicated to establishing supply chains in impossible locations. This unit, operating outside the official combat structure, had saved countless lives, and its existence was still classified at the highest level. The Marines who truly knew war, the ones who ran the logistics and saw the daily miracle of supplies arriving where they shouldn't, knew about the Ghost Platoon, if not by name, then by their impossible results. Mia looked at the feather, then at Tank, who was now swaggering at the main entrance, laughing loudly with a few of his cronies. Tank represented the visible, loud, superficial Marine Corps. Mia and the feather represented the hidden, quiet, essential core. She looked at the Marines in the barracks, Ramos, the corporal, all of them. They had turned toward Tank, but they had stood silently for her. They were logistics, administration, and supply, the people who saw the numbers and understood the impossible. They understood the real language of war, integrity and survival, not shouting. Mia realized her only path to justice wasn't through formal reprimand. It was through the silent network of respect. She needed to expose her true, essential, hidden value to the one person who could truly appreciate the gravity of the wooden box and the composite feather. The general who controlled the entire base's supply chain, General Hayes, Tank's powerful father. She had the key to a truth that would expose the son and force the father to choose between blood and military integrity. Part 3, The Hidden Protocol. Staff Sergeant Mia Chen knew she was in a race against time. The barracks administrative section had collectively stood up for her, an immense gesture of silent loyalty, but Major Pierce's dismissal of her complaint meant Tank Rourke now felt completely untouchable. His arrogance escalated, making the administrative wing a place of constant, petty harassment. Mia spent her nights in her small room, not sleeping, but meticulously examining the components of her hidden carbon composite feather. It was a digital key as much as a symbol, capable of accessing the most secure military logistics network. The network that governed every supply truck, every food ration, and every bullet on Camp Pendleton. Her mission was no longer about personal justice. It was about exposing Tank's deep operational incompetence. Mia had noticed that the base's current supply tracking system, installed 6 months ago, was riddled with crippling vulnerabilities. Tank, the operations manager, had simply covered up the errors, fearing an investigation that might expose his lax control. The opportunity came with a high-stakes, base-wide training exercise scheduled for the following week, Operation Desert Shield Redux. It required the Barracks 31 administrative wing to run a full, real-time logistics simulation, supplying 20 different field units across the expansive training grounds. Failure meant severe operational consequences. Mia knew Tank would assign her to the most tedious, complex task, reconciling the incoming combat unit reports with the projected supply drops, a task designed to overwhelm and expose her TBI-induced stress. When the assignment came down, Mia accepted it with quiet calm. Tank stood over her desk, his face a mask of condescending satisfaction. "I want a full, real-time logistics manifest, Chen," Tank said, leaning close. "Every bullet, every bag of rice, every gallon of water, don't miss a thing. If the general sees one error in your report, you're not just reassigned, you're out." Mia waited until he walked away before she plugged her small, encrypted laptop into the main barracks server. She didn't want to fix the system. She wanted to expose the depth of its brokenness, forcing the general to see the operational decay his son had enabled. She began her analysis, but instead of using the new, flawed system, she used the hidden digital key inside the carbon feather. It activated a legacy system she had helped design years ago, the Ghost Protocol, an absolute integrity scan that ran underneath the primary network, cross-referencing all reported supply data against original order records and historical burn rates. The results were catastrophic. Tank hadn't just been sloppy. He had actively manipulated the supply figures to cover a massive, ongoing theft of high-value equipment, specifically night vision goggles and advanced communication relays. The system showed a surplus where there should have been a deficit. A trick Tank used to cover his tracks and sell the equipment on the black market. The Ghost Protocol report showed that if the upcoming Desert Shield Redux exercise ran with the current, manipulated supply figures, the combat units would run out of critical, high-value gear halfway through the training, a simulated disaster that would expose the base to potential real-world failure. Mia printed the raw log data, a thick stack of papers detailing Tank's thefts and the operational failure he was about to cause. She knew she couldn't show this to Major Pierce. She had to bypass the entire local command structure and deliver this directly to the only man who cared more about military integrity than his son's feelings. General Hayes, Tank's father, the man who oversaw all of Camp Pendleton's operational readiness. The problem was that General Hayes was heavily guarded, working in a command center miles away. Access was impossible without high-level clearance. Mia sat at her desk, staring at the problem, the physical distance, the security protocols, the high cost of failure. Her eyes drifted to the Marines around her, Ramos, the corporal, the logistics crew who had silently defended her. They saw her struggle, and they knew she was working on something critical. Sergeant Ramos approached her desk slowly, placing a coffee mug down, not speaking at first. "Staff Sergeant," Ramos finally said, his voice low, "I noticed you running the old diagnostics. That's classified stuff." Mia looked at him, realizing she was dealing with true peers, men and women who understood the hidden lines of command. "It's the only way to find the rot, Sergeant. The supply figures are cooked. Tank is covering up a massive theft of NVGs and comms gear. The exercise will fail." Ramos nodded slowly. "We knew the numbers felt wrong, but we couldn't bypass the new system." He glanced at the general's distant command center on a map on the wall. "You need to get this to the general, don't you?" Mia confirmed it with a grim look. "Yes, but I can't get past the command center checkpoint without a major or higher." Ramos smiled, a genuine, powerful expression of loyalty. "Maybe not, but the entire base supply line runs through our terminal, and every single Marine in this barracks is loyal to the integrity of the mission, not to Tank. We can't escort you, Staff Sergeant, but we can clear a path. We can give you the window." Mia looked at the circle of silent, watching Marines who were, in a flash of understanding, her true command. They weren't desk jockeys. They were the essential backbone of the Marine Corps, and they were willing to risk their careers to expose the corruption. They had seen Tank shove her and laugh, and now they were preparing to repay the insult with organized, tactical defiance. Part 4, The Silent Signal. The plan hatched in the Barracks 31 administrative wing was a silent, bloodless coup, orchestrated by the very desk jockeys Tank Rourke scorned. It was built entirely on perfect timing and the exploitation of logistical blind spots, Mia's specialty. The goal was simple: get Mia past the heavily fortified gate of the command center and deliver the report on Tank's theft and operational risk to General Hayes, and do it within a 10-minute window when the base's security cameras were on a scheduled network maintenance loop. Sergeant Ramos, the supply transport master, took the lead on the distraction. He leveraged the upcoming Operation Desert Shield Redux exercise, announcing an urgent, unforeseen equipment quarantine affecting the main gate. "Operation in effect, Staff Sergeant," Ramos reported to Mia as she gathered the thick stack of incriminating logs. "The main gate is locked down, backing up all outbound traffic, but the rear maintenance gate, the one for sewage and disposal trucks, will be forced to open for a necessary HAZMAT waste transfer. That gate only reports to the logistics terminal, not the command center." Mia knew this was her only chance. She strapped her small, classified laptop bag, containing the Ghost Protocol data, across her chest. She had deliberately removed the carbon feather from her wooden box and pinned it to the inside flap of her uniform jacket, her final, secret insurance policy. She slipped out the back of the barracks and into a waiting, unmarked utility van driven by Corporal Jensen, the Marine who managed the personnel files. They reached the rear maintenance gate. It was chaos. A sewage truck was blocking the view, and a small team of maintenance Marines, led by Ramos, were arguing loudly with the guards about the emergency HAZMAT transfer. As the guards' attention was fully diverted, Corporal Jensen flashed a maintenance badge and drove the utility van through the gate. They were through, but the time was critical. Mia was now on the final stretch, a long, straight road leading to the command center. General Hayes' security was legendary, a three-layered system of checkpoints and high-resolution cameras. But Mia had noticed another flaw in the system, one exposed by the Ghost protocol. General Hayes' office used a massive, specialized display system to track all real-time supply logistics across the base, a system tanks' rigged figures fed into. This system was linked to a seldom-used, internal communication antenna near the office, designed only for emergency, hard-line inputs. As Corporal Jensen drove the last few hundred yards, Mia pulled out her laptop. She connected a small, specialized antenna to the classified port on her Ghost protocol computer. She couldn't breach the General's computer directly, but she could send a direct, high-priority, encrypted signal to his logistics display system. Mia typed a short, sharp command sequence. The message wasn't words, it was data. Target General Hayes logistics display. Signal Ghost protocol integrity alert. Contents real-time supply deficit simulation based on tank's actual figures. She hit transmit. The entire base's supply map on General Hayes' high-tech wall screen, the map that should have been showing healthy green supply lines for the exercise, suddenly flashed bright, catastrophic red. The system, designed for integrity, screamed an unheard warning. Inside the command center, General Hayes, a serious, imposing man, was in a high-level briefing. His eyes shot to the massive logistics display. He didn't see a glitch. He saw a base-wide operational collapse. "What in the devil is that?" General Hayes roared, pointing at the flashing red screen. "We are showing a total deficit of 40% NVGs and comms relays for Redux. Rourke assured me the supply chain was overstocked." Mia, meanwhile, was at the final checkpoint, the gates of the command center. The guards, distracted by the visible panic on their security feeds caused by the logistics display alert, didn't notice the silent, focused Marine approaching. Mia walked quickly past the momentary chaos and straight into General Hayes' outer office. She ignored the frantic staff and walked directly toward the open door of the General's briefing room. She stood in the doorway, her uniform neat, her expression unreadable. She held the stack of raw, incriminating tank logs. General Hayes looked up, his face a mixture of fury and shock at the logistics display. He saw a staff sergeant he didn't recognize, standing in his doorway. "Who are you, Marine? And what is the meaning of this supply anomaly?" the General demanded. Mia stepped forward, placing the thick packet of evidence firmly on the briefing table. "Staff Sergeant Mia Chen, sir. Barracks 31 Logistics. And that anomaly, General, is the truth. It is the real-time operational deficit caused by Gunnery Sergeant Rourke's theft of high-value equipment. The supply figures were manipulated. The exercise is a guaranteed failure." She looked the powerful General squarely in the eye, prepared for the consequences of accusing his son. "The only person who knew how to run the integrity check was the one you dismissed as a paper pusher, sir. I have the proof, and I have one more thing." In that moment, a massive, deafening alarm blared through the command center. It wasn't the logistics alert. It was the main barracks security system. Mia knew exactly what was happening. Tank, realizing his corruption was exposed, had just made his final, arrogant, fatal mistake. The sudden, piercing security alarm that ripped through the command center was the ultimate distraction. But Major General Hayes, staring at the raw logistics data staff Sergeant Mia Chen had provided, was already focused on the bigger betrayal. "The barracks alarm, sir," a frantic aide whispered. "It appears Gunnery Sergeant Rourke, in a moment of panic, tried to clear his desk and destroyed the main server hard drive to hide evidence." General Hayes didn't even flinch. He looked at Mia, at the evidence, and then at the logistics display that was still screaming red. He saw a clear choice between his blood and the integrity of the Marine Corps. "Staff Sergeant Chen," the general said, his voice quiet, filled with immense disappointment. The evidence is damning. You've exposed massive fraud and an operational security risk. Thank you. He then gave immediate orders to his aide, orders that would seal his son's fate. Arrest Rourke immediately, launch a full CID investigation, and quarantine Barracks 31's server for forensic analysis. The general then looked at the carbon feather pinned to the inside of Mia's jacket. The ghost platoon insignia she hadn't realized was slightly visible. And Staff Sergeant Chen, General Hayes continued, his eyes suddenly sharp with deep recognition. The only Marines who know that data tag, that specific ghost protocol, were the ones who saved the entire Mekong operation in 08. The ones we had to disavow. The ones who run on sheer intuition and technical genius. You didn't just find this flaw, you were trained to prevent it. He walked around the table and gave Mia a crisp, powerful salute, a gesture of respect that transcended rank and family. The Marine Corps owes you an apology, Staff Sergeant. Your sacrifice is noted. You saved this base. But the final moment of vindication, the moment Tank Rourke received his true verdict, happened back at Barracks 31. Tank, having smashed the server hard drive and gathered his personal belongings, was swaggering out the main door, confident that he had destroyed all evidence. He saw the gathered Marines, Ramos, the corporal, the administrative staff, standing in a tight knot, their faces unreadable. Tank, emboldened by his arrogance, decided to deliver one final, contemptuous farewell to the woman he thought was a defeated desk jockey. He hadn't seen Mia leave, and he believed she was still waiting for him to return. "Did you hear that, losers?" Tank shouted at the group. "The general's favorite son is moving on. Get back to your little files, and tell that miserable Private Chen to enjoy her new assignment, mopping the heads for the rest of her useless career." He took 3 arrogant steps toward the group, shoving Corporal Jensen hard in the shoulder as he passed. Corporal Jensen stumbled but did not fall. Tank Rourke laughed, a loud, booming, triumphant sound. And then every single Marine in the barracks, every staff sergeant, corporal, and lieutenant, who had turned toward him earlier, now turned away. They didn't move their feet, but their torsos rotated in unison, their backs facing him in a collective, devastating gesture of absolute contempt. The rejection was silent, perfect, and total. They didn't have to speak. They had already received General Hayes' urgent, encrypted communication confirming Tank's arrest and Mia's valor. They knew that the useless career was Tank's and the desk jockey was the genuine hero. Tank's laughter died, choked by the realization that he was utterly, completely alone, rejected by the very people whose respect he craved. The combined, silent judgment of his peers was more powerful than any court-martial. As MPs arrived minutes later to haul him away, Tank Rourke understood the truth. He had dismissed the entire backbone of the Marine Corps as weak. He had mocked and shoved the one Marine who knew the true meaning of honor and the true value of service. The final word on the matter came 2 weeks later. Staff Sergeant Mia, whisper, Chen was promoted to gunnery sergeant, effective immediately. She was given command of a new, high-priority command integrity unit, tasked with auditing the entire base's supply chain for fraud and operational risk. Her first act was to walk back to her old desk. The administrative Marines were working, but they stopped when she approached. They all stood, rigid, offering a collective, silent salute of profound respect. Mia walked to the corner where her wooden box had shattered. It was no longer there. Instead, resting on a freshly polished patch of concrete was a brand-new box, identical to the old one but inscribed simply with her call sign, Whisper. She picked it up. Inside, the broken compass and the faded map were perfectly preserved. And sitting atop the relics was the carbon feather, the badge of the ghost platoon, now recognized and honored by the only people whose opinion truly mattered, the silent, essential warriors of the Corps. Mia had earned her redemption, not by being loud, but by being the essential truth.